Dear colleagues, if you don't mind, I would like to ask Dr. Joseph Azizi and Dr. Stephen Sutcliffe to join me regain the stage for question and answers before we'll go for a lunch break, please. So I think, first of all, Dr. Joseph Azizi has question.
Well, I don't know if I do want to ask. Thank you. Thank you. I do want to ask Stephen a question. In fact, I could have a conversation with Stephen about what he said. But first of all, I'd like to know about yourselves. What did you think? I mean, for example, I spoke about Pasub Padarak, and many of you attended. How did it strike you? I mean, was it believable? Was it just a fantasy? Does it have any relation at all to what goes on in your lives? Or some of you have been to other Christian liturgies. How did it strike you? And then Stephen spoke about the guru thing and what he said about the three modulations which Gurdjieff brought. That's what I'd like to discuss with Stephen. But I mean, did that have any impact on you? Did that make you think of anything? Has anything been aroused, as it were? Yes.
Good morning. When you were speaking, I was remembering being a 12-year-old attending confirmation classes and then taking my first experience with the Eucharist and how naive I was, and yet how engrossed I was also in the process. And I'm searching for, in some way, I guess, that same naivety with what Mr. Gurdjieff brings to the table. And I'm a bit lost, quite frankly.
What's your name?
John Giffey.
John. Yeah. I don't think that naivety is what we want now. I suspect it's more in the direction of simplicity. It's an inner simplicity. We are naive when we're young. I mean, I could tell some stories about myself, but I think it's part of the common human condition. We're made to be that way because we have to accept what our parents tell us. If we argued with what our parents told us, we'd never learn to do anything. We'd be rebellious. And so as children, we do have to be suggestible. I believe we're made that way. But it's as St. Paul says, when I was a child, but now I'm not a child anymore. One advantage of this suggestibility before our parents is that the head doesn't interfere with the feeling experience. So if our parents take us to church or synagogue, whatever, as children, we don't have the head, the formatory apparatus, Gurdjieff called it, to interfere with the feeling experience of being there. Now, it depends on the type. Some children are more sensitive than others. Some children are about as sensitive as a cow on Valium. You know, nothing's going to penetrate them whatsoever. But some it will. And then if you've been touched when you're young, I believe we can always find it again, but in a form appropriate to our advanced age, our greater age. And this is more in the direction of simplicity. Now, there's much more I could say about that. Self-observation is a big help to be aware this is a thought, this is a feeling, this is an organic instinct. This thought has nothing behind it. It's only a reflex of an organic instinct. I start to separate out from my thoughts. As I do that, I start to become more available to feeling. I place myself in conditions where I can experience things with the feeling impulse. And so I start to then be able to experience things simply, and memories of the past come back, but blended with everything which has happened between then and now. They come back with a new richness. It's just a question of finding someone to help you with the method. That's my view. Yes.
Andrea here.
Andrea?
Andrea, yes. I wanted to ask you if in Gurdjieff there is a sense of remembering from the past of other lives or previous lives, and what it was his view on reincarnation, or if it was primarily experiencing the life we live in and actions of learning through this life.
Yeah. Stephen, would you like to say something, or would you prefer I took that one? Okay. It's a very large topic. It's actually a very large topic if we're going to go into absolutely everything. But Gurdjieff always began with what was most directly of relevance to ourselves. What is the possibility and what is the value of remembering ourselves in a past life if we can't remember ourselves now in this life? So we begin with this life. I wish to remember myself in this life, in this moment. And then, to the extent that I can remember myself now, more will be folded into that moment. And that's all we have to be aware of. We don't have to go into anything else. If you've had a specific experience, I could discuss that with you privately, because every now and then people do remember certain things. But what are they remembering? Where is the thought coming from? What is often interpreted as being a memory from a past life is something quite different. It's, well, I won't go into it now, but the important thing is be here now. Only then, and only then can the rest of the other things find a useful place. That's how I'd approach that, Andrea.
Just to add one thing, I was also referring to the fact that in certain traditions there is the concept that we forget through life, in the body, what we used to know as higher beings, a higher form of energies. And so I was thinking, if in the process of regaining awareness and consciousness in Gurdjieff, there is this, let's say, accidental reconnection or rediscovery of our past lives or our energy, not necessarily through an intentional action, but through a regaining of consciousness by releasing some of the vain, interactions with the reality that is not true.
If you've had it's not based on an experience. This is just theoretical. Is that correct?
Well, I had experience on my own of certain things that I can talk to you in private, but also is a theoretical assumption if it can be a general way of reconnected with higher.
Then as a general answer, the answer is no, because we don't have a life and a consciousness which we can remember in that way. Or, as I said, we can't have a relation to a past life until we are fully alive now. We have to have this life before we can even be concerned about other lives. So the basic answer, theoretically, is no.
However, what shall I? Oh, this spoon here. Okay. What is that? Okay. Well, yeah. No, is that question you or do? Oh, right.
What's your name, please?
Scam e date tama bobel mo hamare paitasti et dera ultito ka picture แล้วก็the two passages the verse
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you for your excellent presentation and superb insights.
Pleasure.
I have one question and I have one thing to ask. So the first, I will ask question. What was the name of God for Gurdjieff, if he ever stated? Was it Jesus or was it without name? And my thing to ask, if you could please share your presentation with us or email. It was very delightful. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't quite understand what you were asking. Did you ask, did he give Christ the name Jesus?
Basically, what I'm trying to find out, if Gurdjieff in his studies ever was able to name the God's name. Was he considering that Jesus Christ was a God who created this universe, or he had a different name for the
Yes.
God?
I see. Thanks. Thank you, Samara. Yeah. I go into this in my paper, and the answer is not without ambiguity. But and certainly you can have a copy of my paper. I just need to add a few more things in. It will only take me an hour or so when I get the chance to sit down, and I'm happy to make the paper available to you. There is a certain ambiguity. What is clear is that Gurdjieff is not saying that Jesus was an ordinary man, and he is not saying that Jesus was God in the classic Christian way of doing it. He's neither of those. He says that Jesus was man number 8, and in other words, he was more than human. In the paper, I explain that if you just take what he says, as reported in Search of the Miraculous, he's basically saying that Jesus is the equivalent of an archangel. So he's not saying he's God. And in the 1940s, Gurdjieff is very, very clear. He says Jesus was a man. He was not God. And then, but that's not quite what he's saying in Moscow during World War II. World War One. So there is a certain ambivalence about it. He doesn't. I don't think he wants to be pinned down. So he's not saying he was an ordinary man. He was more than a man, and he is quite clear that Christ, Jesus, thank you, was deliberately sent to earth to do a message, and that there was a preparation beforehand where higher energies were made available so Jesus could do what he did.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I wonder if, since no one is asking me a question, which is absolutely fine, I thought rather than just sit here quietly, I might reintroduce my voice into the conversation. In my paper, I made a distinction, a rough and ready distinction between the intrinsic interests of studying Gurdjieff's teachings and methods and the extrinsic interests. And obviously, my paper was more about the extrinsic interests, as I said. But some of you may know or may not know that Joseph and I actually wrote a chapter together as co-authors in a collection that came out a couple of years ago, in which we tried to combine the two levels of discussion and analysis, and in which effectively I provided, in the terms I've given you, the kind of extrinsic contextual issues, and in a sense, Joseph drilled down into the actual practices that Gurdjieff was teaching. Feel free to confirm or contradict me, Joseph. And we were trying to show, at least in my eyes, that there's value in combining different levels of analysis of this kind of material. And as an example of that relevant to this conference, I would say that in some ways, it may be the case that we're only just trying to get a sense of the Armenianness or the West Asianness of Gurdjieff's material as a factor in the wider guru field as I've described it, and as a practice of value as well, through having a conference such as this, and in a sense zooming out to the wider extrinsic geography and sociology and history of the Middle East. So in that respect, the kind of extrinsic ingest can help us pinpoint where this material is specifically coming from and the kinds of values it therefore brings from that culture in question. And particularly in my interest is in the ashok qualities of Gurdjieff, which couldn't have come from a North American context, couldn't have come from many European contexts, even if there were bardic traditions there. So in short, I'm hoping that in some ways you might be open to the idea that different levels of explanation can coexist here and do different kinds of jobs with a common aim towards what we might say an analysis in the round or some kind of holistic analysis. Deathly silence. Go on. And you're not doing it.
Okay. So, any other questions? Please. So,
What is the origin, the etymological origin of the word lit?
well, to whom the question is?
Go ahead, yeah, the best answers. The etymological origins of liturgy.
Oh, liturgia, liturgia from Greece, from Greek. The urgia at the end is the word for doing. The light at the beginning is related to a root meaning the people. So it's either the work of the people or a work for the people, a work involving the people, something like that. I don't believe it's entirely clear, but it's known that those are the two words, the two roots, laos, the people, and ergo, I work. But I'd like to ask Stephen a question. Stephen, I'm always struck by how practical Gurdjieff was. How could you speak about that in relation to the guru field? Because I don't think if I needed some work done on the air conditioner, I could have asked Madame Blavatsky, but I could have asked Gurdjieff.
Or indeed Rudolf Stein, yeah. Oops.
Yeah, something.
We need Gurdjieff here. These people are all Rudolf Steiner people. Sorry, no offense. Yeah. Okay, I'll just go if you got this. I'll just
Go there.
yeah.
But you can use it.
Well, thank you for that kind question to bring me back into. I agree. I mean, I agree entirely that Gurdjieff seems to me to be intensely practical, and so in the three modalities of practice that I tried to introduce at the end of my paper, the first one being the presence of the bard, the presence of the ashok, who has a charismatic presence and will hold you with the tales, which will do things to you. You know, they won't just be matters for thinking or cognition, but they'll be matters for emotional involvement, and there'll be music and there'll be song there. So there's a practical and simple and accessible way of involving the whole of the three-brained being, if you like. So the ashok, the bardic tradition, is vital, and I think that the movements are vital. As I said, Karol Cusack and others have done work to show the wider context of various types of sacred dances that were available or being developed in the early 1920s in Europe. But it seems to me that the qualities of the sacred gymnastics, as they're sometimes called, were of a different kind of design, less aesthetically oriented, as in the case of Steiner's eurythmy and Peter Dionov's paneurythmy, and more about interiorized proprioceptive movements of the limbs and the body and the coordination, but also juxtaposition of these in different kinds of ways. And that seems to me another difference to the other dance systems that were around. And again, it was about, as I understand it, fundamentally practicing the movements, even though Gurdjieff resorted to using them as demonstrations publicly to gain interest and such like. But again, it seems to me that the point of the movements is actually to do them. And finally, the food culture seems to me to be intensely practical as well. Rather than sit and read sutras or read the key to theosophy or read knowledge of higher worlds or any of these multifarious texts that were being produced in the 20s and 30s, one would sit with fellow students, with Gurdjieff, and eat food and nourish the body, nourish the sense of conviviality and sociality, and take actual time to be present together. And as I said, briefly in my talk, this seems to stand in stark contrast to the developing fast food culture of a European context, where the instrumental rationality that Weber talks about, where everything is cut to the finest corner to get the maximum juice as quickly as possible out of everything, is vastly challenged by the idea of a feast where you're taking hours to go through a meal, going through various courses, drinking toasts to the participants, and actually being embodied through that sense of food practice. So yes, I mean, I think, and of course, we know Gurdjieff was also a fine cook and a fine chef. I'm not sure if we have that report about Rudolf Steiner or Madame Blavatsky or others in the Masters, Mystics and Teachers that Landau talks about. I mean, they may well have been able to cook nice meals, but the point is that the ability to be a food teacher, a teacher through food, is something that seems quite unique to Gurdjieff as far as I can see.
Hello. Oh, thank you. I would add something. I would like to suggest something vis-a-vis the ritual of a feast that is certainly ritualized up north in Georgia and other places, and even here we have the ritual of the toastmaster, the Hamadah, and that's, I think, a critical third force in the alchemy of the whole thing of a feast. It's not just having dinner with friends. It's something more than that, and that is, and it triggers inner work. For example, the way the toast to the idiots, as I understand it, with some experience, is simply is that you don't sip your drink while it's sitting at the table, whether it's vodka or wine or whatever it was. You only take a sip when the Hamadah makes a toast, so it's a conscious action. So it's not a dinner party, is what I'm saying. I just wanted to sort of add that ritualized thing, which I think even in family gatherings, we've sort of, in the West, we've lost a bit, the respect for this role. And I know in people then drink a little bit, and in America, I've experienced where someone else wants to give a toast, just because they're slightly drunk, and it's totally inappropriate in our Caucasian culture, as I understand it. That you don't do that. The Hamadah. Anyway, I think that's the point I wanted to add.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's a fantastic way of transmission.
Yes. And also, I can't remember where, but Gurdjieff says somewhere that alcohol is a very special, pure friend. I can't quite remember the exact phrase, but it's not there to be sort of casually drunk. It's to be drunk with attention.
I think he sort of said it separates personality from essence for a while, doesn't it? So he used it, I think, ritualistically, but also to see into his students, because there's something that separates only for a while until then it's over. The moment passes.
But again, from my particular interest from the extrinsic point of view, it seems to me that this is not a particularly European or Anglophone kind of culture of eating. Gurdjieff is bringing something else, but it's coming from, immediately from Armenia and quite clearly from wider adjacent food cultures in West Asia and the Middle East that, have got something rather more different to the...
There's a sacredness to it.
Yeah, the secularized
Yeah.
thing, to put it bluntly, of European and towards...
Fast food, obviously. Yeah.
And Stephen,
yeah.
And Stephen, Gurdjieff as guru, what about Gurdjieff as priest? The priest in the Eastern tradition has a different role from the priest in the Western tradition. He's more of a...
Yeah, okay, but yeah. I mean, guru might sound slightly pejorative. I mean, it can have that kind of tone. I mean, in the way I was trying to use it, I meant it more as a descriptor of a certain kind of practice, so that a certain kind of teaching rather. So that's the first thing to say. Well, you would be in a better position than me to talk about the priestly role in the Eastern tradition. I mean, it's a fair point, and there is evidence that Gurdjieff trained as a priest or had some teaching as a priest.
Yes, he says in meetings with remarkable men that he was a pupil of the famous Father Yevlampios in the Sanahin monastery for 3 months. And it's known that he was, well, there's good reason to believe that he did actually become at least a deacon or a priest. But I tried to research the Sanahin monastery at the time at the turn of the century, 19th, 20th century. I couldn't find anything in English. At some point, it would be great if some Armenian scholars were able to tell us a lot more about the Armenian church, the Armenian people and their history in English, because I was looking for that sort of material. There was, of course, Professor Cowley's work in the Cambridge History of Eastern Christianity. But apart from that, there are articles which are so learned and recondite that I didn't know where to begin.
But just to take up again the point about what would be the best term then, whether it were priest or whether it were guru, perhaps a wider point might be that there was a wider field of teachers. They were presenting themselves as in various ways independent or coming from alternative traditions, of coming, in a sense, into a post-Christian culture, as I was trying to suggest, which is not a culture where there's no Christianity, but it's a culture where the sense of Christendom as the informing values of the societies in Europe, in this part of the world as well, was being lost, being secularized. So these folks are emerging, I think, and offering various ways, if you like, to re-enchant or re-sacralize the world, in many cases drawing on traditional forms of practice and wisdom as well. So in a funny kind of way, although I was saying that Gurdjieff's authority was charismatic, depending very much on his presence and the vitality of his energy and these kinds of things. In a sense, he's drawing back to traditional sources of authority, the authority of the bard and the ashok, a particularly male and patriarchal form of authority in many ways. He's pushing back to that kind of world of lost authorities as well. And one might even say that was another source of his appeal in a European context. He wasn't particularly arguing for equality, democracy, and all these kinds of things. He was really arguing for a return to tradition.
Dear colleagues, unfortunately, we have time limit, so I would like to close this session by thanking all our presenters